First off, I love my kids.
This is Learning to Dad.
I'm the cool dad. That's my thing.
With Tyler Ross.
But what I do have are a very particular set of skills.
I'm going to have fun, and you're going to have fun.
So anyway, we were talking about this, this Nine Nations thing.
So we had to stop because we had to pee off the side of the porch. So.
Glad you said that.
Yeah.
Right. That's the nice thing about having a small forest is if anybody objects to me taking a leak off my own front porch, they're trespassing.
You have a 360-degree range of urination here.
Exactly.
I like it. That's the goal for my next house.
Yeah.
I'll put that in the remarks of the multiple listing service.
Yeah, exactly.
Must be able to pee. The young couple looking for place they can pee anywhere.
Anywhere they like. Right. Like the proverbial bear in the forest.
Yeah.
Anywhere they want.
Anywhere they want.
We have bears now, by the way.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Yeah, just jam. They got to go somewhere.
Yep, that's right. So anyway, so Nine Nations. So you were saying it has the country fragmented irrevocably. Well, here's what I can tell you is that back in the day, in the 70s, we knew some things for a stone cold fact. Mm. We knew there was this border in a place like Colorado. And east of this border, in the plains and the wheat fields, was one civilization, and west of it, in the Rockies, was an entirely different civilization. We knew this as for sure as we were born. It was it was a news map, and when we started talking to each other, we began to link these up, and we realized, oh my God, it's like this in the whole continent.
Yeah.
Anyway, but it took us. Where did these lines come from? Where did we hallucinate this or what? And anyway, one of the things I discovered was that if you had a twin brother, I could demonstrate to you that there would be differences between you and him.
Sure.
So what that means in principle now is that in principle you could come up with the 326 million nations of the United States. That every single one of us is different.
Fair, yeah.
Yeah. So where did this 9 come from? Well, these turned out to be the biggest places about which you could say something meaningful and something important. Mm-hmm. That's where they came up. And it was originally a news map, in the benefit of hindsight. Yeah. This is where the news occurred. Boundaries between clashing cultures is where news occurs. It's the clang that you hear. That's the news.
Never thought of it in that way.
Yeah, that's the news. And so, I'll give you an example. So, like back in the day, there was the farmers were all upset about federal policy, and they were figuring they were screwed, and they were right. And so they all showed up in Washington with their heavy equipment, with their tractors, and they started roaring up and down the mall in D.C. And so we had to go out and do something about what's the problem. Well, the New York Times, predictably enough, sent their reporters to Iowa, and their story sucked.
Yeah.
Because Iowa is the center of the breadbasket. And all of the institutions and all of the banks and everything is set up to do everything the farmer's way.
Yeah.
Because we'd been working on these borders, we sent to Colorado.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's where you'd find the pissed off farmers. Mm-hmm. Because at the time, the western part of Colorado, this is where, this is after the energy crisis, this is where everybody was looking for oil shale and tar sands and all that stuff in the west. And so Denver isn't the capital of anything particularly important. It's just the border town between these two warring worlds of of the breadbasket and the empty quarter. And so, we knew this existed for a fact, but how that could be or why that could be, that's what took longer to understand. And in fact, it wasn't until after the Nine Nations book came out. This is one surprise after another. and it became at 9. So I mean, I thought the way this worked is you write a book, you hand it in, they publish it, end of story. Oh no, it's never the end. And all I wanted out of this was to see all of the continent. So I spent 100,000 miles traveling around the continent. That's all, and I got what I wanted. Well, the thing came out, and then this really amazing things happened. Like it became a cult item among marketers and broadcasters and automobile manufacturers.
Yeah.
The 9 nations of Lincoln Mercury. Really, they did that.
No way.
Yeah. And political operatives. It's still a cult item, kind of.
How do you feel about that? How's that make
Astonished.
you feel? Yeah.
Slack-jawed. Well, anyway, and that so that got me. That's when I began to realize, oh, wait a minute. This is not a geography book. This is not about geography. It's about culture and values, isn't it? This is about who we are, how we got that way, where we're headed, and what makes us tick. And it's a story that goes forward, goes backwards for 400 years, and it goes forward as far as the eye can see, and it's enduring. And despite all of the upheavals, I mean, this is not the worst time the Republic has ever been through. It endures and it matters. And these were not the old-fashioned culture and values. Like, for example, what the Southeast that I call Dixie. It's an old word, but it's a brand new place. And what holds that together is not so much the ancient past, but the fact that it's the place that's been the most whipsawed and future shocked by change.
Okay. That's
what holds the Southeast together. And I'm talking, basically from Houston to northern Florida to southern Virginia. And this is a place where they're still dealing with. Dixie was a place that was liberated, essentially, by the federal government in the 60s from all of those centuries of being a place that was primarily agricultural, primarily backward, primarily disease-ridden, primarily racist. It's not like that anymore. It just really isn't. I mean, it's a new place, but it's really genuinely a new place. But people are still coming to grips with that. And they're doing it in a variety of different ways, and there's a whole lot more voices that you hear now in Dixie than you did 50 years ago. And so they're inventing this as they go along at the same time that history is never dead. So that's why the Southeast is such an interesting place to look at and why it's such a fascinating movie to watch.
Yeah. I want to go 100 different directions because I could talk to you on 100 different topics and never feel wanting for stimulation. But I'm gonna do a hard shift to being a grandparent.
Yeah.
So I can just leave it at that, or I can ask you a more direct question.
Try the direct question, and I'll ignore it or not if I see fit.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So let's talk about context, because you're not a futurist, but people might accuse you of being that. Like, how do you feel about the context of raising kids when you raise kids versus the context in which your daughter is raising children?
Yeah. So I've got my first and only grandkid, Louis Roland Sollitt. Roland is his middle name. It's my father's name, so he's part of the family, and he's now 2.5, and he's really I mean, the one thing I can say for sure, for absolute stone sure, about the difference about the way he's growing up and the way my kids grew up is that Louis has got a lot smarter parents than they did. a lot more smarter and more sophisticated and thoughtful and all that jazz. I think all of these kids. I think that's the good news about all of your peers and your pals and all that stuff. They're just a lot smarter and hipper than we were back in the day, and I'm really impressed. I mean, I'm really impressed by the examples that I see. Like, your your sister Ryan just had a kid. And, I just have a hunch she's going to be a much better parent than...
She's already an amazing parent.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's just, it feels like she's natural. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And you, for that matter. Even you.
After these stories that you've shared, I do feel like it is even Tyler.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Because they're so exceptional.
But I'm teasing. But, I think people rise to the occasion. So to say would I do it differently? Well, if I had to do it all over again, well, as the old cliche goes, life is a river. You can never step into the same place twice. And so, we did the best we could under the circumstances with what we had, and people today have an entirely different set of circumstances, and they're learning from it, and they're adapting on the run. And among the people I admire who are in the parenting game now, they move faster.
Yeah.
Than we possibly could have at the time. And so my reading of history is that it's always a balance. It's always a very precarious balance between what Dickens called the best of times and worst of times. There's the whole thing is about to fall apart, and the whole thing is about to be an incredible explosion of, we're halfway between heaven and hell all the time. That's a constant throughout all of these millennia.
Yeah, Jordan Peterson calls it chaos and shit. Never mind.
Yeah. Too much tequila.
Yep. That's a fact.
Yeah, there you go.
As we have more. Cling. Well, let me ask you this. What's an advantage you had in your period of time raising kids that Simone and John do not have raising Lewis? And I'll flip that.
Well, let me speak personally rather than, cosmically and all that stuff.
Sure.
So when Adrian and I met, we were both working at the Post and all that stuff, and we, started dating, and then she moved, and we started shacking up, and all that stuff. And anyway, when she continued working, and she ended up working for, all this time she ended up working for the Annapolis, left the Post to get a better job at the Annapolis, Maryland Capitol. And then she left that to get a better job at the St. Petersburg, Florida Times. And all this time we were doing these, long-distance romance and all that stuff. And anyway, and then she came back, and at some point she decided that she was really burning out. And I said, tell you what, let's do a division of responsibility. Mm-hmm. I'll make the money and you do everything else.
Yeah.
And so we did. And this has not prevented her from working. She's got her own company where she does food shows at prestigious locations like that she just came back from, like the U.S. Botanical Garden on the Mall in Washington. And she's the longtime chairman of the Fauquier County Planning Commission. Mm-hmm. And so Simone, my eldest daughter, refers to her as a French chef with a Jones for zoning.
That's pretty good.
Pretty funny, huh?
Yeah, that's pretty good. I know it to be true also because I've sat in front of her in the commission, and I've eaten her food.
Pretty funny. So she wanted to really, what she really wanted to be had to do this old McDonald farm thing, mm-hmm. and which is in our previous farm at New Moan Hay. She raised cattle, hogs, chicken, geese, ducks, rabbits, the whole 9 yards.
Wow.
We pushed $15,000 worth of meat in 70s money per acre.
Wow.
Off that land, and she kind of anticipated today's locavore and organic, all of that stuff. None of that stuff existed at the time.
Yeah.
She kind of was a pioneer of that. Anyway, but the only way she could do that was if she gave up, her quote-unquote real jobs.
Right.
So I said, fine. You do this, I'll do that. And so I ended up holding down what amounted to 3 jobs, and she ended up doing our dream.
Yeah.
And and that continued when she got pregnant and we started having the 2 kids and all that stuff. And that's this was not an old-time marriage where it was the breadwinner and the child. I mean, this was a modern thing in which we both had plenty of alternatives, and we consciously chose to do this because it's what each one of us wanted. And
yeah. Knowing you, I can attest to that. Anyone listening that has doubts about that claim, I can put to rest. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, there's not a chance that I could talk her into anything.
No, I
much
believe
less,
that too. To this
right,
day.
To this day. Yeah, I mean, she's plenty. She's one of these not pussies.
Yeah, that is so true.
She's not resilient, grit, whatever the word you want for it.
Shouldn't even have to tell you what to do. You already know.
Yeah, that's right. She's already inside my head. That's right. No, that's a good point. But anyway, so we were able to now. So today, one of the problems with having two income families is that that becomes the new normal.
Yeah.
And you end up basing your mortgage around that and stuff like that, about having 2. So that I'm not sure that Simone, I mean, it would be tough if for either John or Simone, my eldest or my son-in-law, it'd be tough for them to decide that they wanted it to be a one-person income and let the other follow their bliss.
Yeah.
So anyway, that I don't envy them that. But anyway, I mean, everybody's got every generation has new challenges to face. We faced ours. We did the best we could, and then we're going to die.
Yep.
And we did the best we could with what we had at the time.
Yeah.
And everybody will do that anyway. But everybody faces different circumstances, and so anyway, so there, and what Simone. So Louis is 2.5, and and there are certain predictable aspects of having a kid. And you can't tell any young parent that there are certain predictable aspects of this. You cannot. It's just pointless. You just have to wait. They'll just wait. Yeah. And so like one of them is one of the stages is we've traveled the world. We're not going to change how we do things just because we've had a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Remember that?
My favorite thing was when we had kids and we would not do things, and people without kids would judge us for not doing those things.
Yeah. Well, yeah,
it's
exactly.
Like one day you'll understand.
Well, it worked. I mean, so it worked for us for a while, So we didn't change until Simone turned 18 months, and that was the moment when we learned. Simone, 18 months was the maximum mobility with the minimum understanding of the word no.
What a great description. What a perfect description.
And I'd had this speech, and we were at some resort at the corporation, having the thing in Arizona, and it had 9 swimming pools.
Yeah.
And Simone, at 18 months, spent the entire time trying to jump into them and drown.
Yep.
Adrian and I didn't even see each other for like 2 days. We were doing this in shift. Mm-hmm. One of us was sleeping and the other was chasing Simone.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so that's after that we learned, okay, this model's going to take a little adjustment.
The hardest I've ever worked in my entire life was 1 year ago at Litchfield Beach at a family vacation. I've never worked so hard in my life trying to keep my kids from getting sucked into the ocean.
There you go. Yeah.
I empathize with you right there.
Yeah. So there, so at this, one of the things I've learned to, think about the future is that the farther back you look, the farther forward you can see. Mm-hmm. So, somebody once said that you can tell how long a book will last by its oldest footnote. If its oldest footnote goes back 8,000 years, it might have a shot.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
wow.
And there's something to that. Anyway, so it's so I guess that's so what you're doing is working on the signal to noise ratio. What's signal and what's noise?
Okay.
What's static and what's important.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so some of the differences between generations is a lot of it is static. Mm-hmm. So you got so you got Twitter, big deal, big whoop.
Yeah.
But what does that mean to what it means to be human? Well, that's a really good question, and I'll get back to you on that.
That's part of that 5-hour conversation we could have about the other things. Let's make another hard pivot and talk about education, because I think that you are very well equipped to talk about it as somebody who considers scenarios going down the road, somebody that teaches and professes at a university and
that's my
spend
story.
a little
That's
bit
my
of time
story.
in
That's my
college.
story, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah. So, do you think that if you had a kid now, or advising your daughter and son-in-law on educating their kid, do you think that you would take the same approach as you did educating your kids?
Actually, they're showing me.
Yeah.
I'm really impressed. I'm really impressed. So, so they both got high pressure jobs.
Yeah.
And so daycare was a given.
Yep.
Just a given. I mean, there was just no. I mean, there was no other. Nothing else entered into the equation.
Right.
Well, so they chose this daycare place that was bilingual.
Interesting. Yeah.
So anyway, they has some fancy formal name, but John and Simone call it the Marias.
Yeah.
That's anyway. So they were having a parent-teacher conference once, and one of the teachers asked, "Does Louis speak English at home?"
It's an interesting question to ask to very white people.
That's right.
Yeah.
Simone said, yeah.
Occasionally Big Latin.
Yeah. But anyway, but it was fascinating. I thought it was just fascinating that to me and probably to her, that the teacher didn't necessarily know the answer to that question, because he was speaking like a native in Spanish at the age of 2.5. I mean, to the extent that a 2.5-year-old speaks.
Right. Oh,
language.
Wow. Sure. Okay.
And it's really interesting in that, to me anyway, he really early came up with a very sophisticated idea of who you spoke which language to.
That's an interesting distinction for 2.5 years old.
Or even a 1.5-year-old.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he knew that he takes one look at me and it's English, and so, I mean, he just knows. Now, I mean, is that a conscious calculation? No, it's something that's now hardwired in his little brain.
Yeah.
And anyway, so we didn't have that option for any of our kids, and wish we did. But it was just. I mean, I give John and Simone astonishing amounts of credit for thinking this far forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
start them young.
Yeah, and that, I mean, it's not just babysitting. It's as long as you're going to do this, let's think about resilience.
Yeah.
Let's think about grit. Let's think about not being a pussy.
Yep. I like it. It all makes so much sense, and you answered the question such a different way than I expected, but I appreciate it so much because it's an important thing to think about, because I don't think a lot of people think about educating their kids until they hit kindergarten.
Right.
Which so much happens between 0 and then. So anybody listening, I think that's a tremendous piece of advice, to be considerate from the get-go.
From the get-go. Before they can talk.
Yeah.
I give John and Simone, I mean, it's all they're doing. This never would have occurred to me, didn't occur to me back in the day.
No, it really, it's crossed my mind, but I prioritized how my kids feel, I think. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Luna Azul, Blue Moon.
Yeah, there you go.
So I've kind of prioritized my kids feeling loved over
It's not an
education, I
either-or
guess.
situation.
It's not at all. No, I guess I didn't think to look for the other thing. I think this checks the box that's important to me. I didn't realize that there was another box to check.
Yeah, that's right.
If I had to do it over again, if I could get love and that, I would do that.
Right, multiple layers. I mean, it's always this and that and some other thing.
Yeah.
That's the one thing you learn when you start thinking systematically about the future. It's never either or.
Yeah.
It's both and both and both and both.
Do you have an opinion about raising kids in the country versus the city?
Well, I think it's a lot easier in the city.
You think so?
Yeah, I do. I mean, there's just so much more available. I mean, we had to do, well, I don't know. I could be talking through my ass.
Well, what about from the kids' perspective? Like, what do you think is...
Simone wanted to get out of Fauquier County as fast as her little legs could carry her. Well, there's another story. So, you want another story?
Cheers.
So, anyway, yeah. So there we were. Simone was, you know the difference between a fairy tale and a Montana smoke jumper story.
I only have heard of one of those, so the difference could be
Fairy tale starts once upon a time.
Yeah.
And a Montana smoke jumper story starts. So there I was, and this is no shit. Montana smoke jumpers are the guys who jump out of airplanes with a parachute into a perfectly good, raging forest fire.
Yes, I like that.
Yeah. Anyway, so Simone is in junior year, and sophomore year even. I mean, that was another one of the things is that it just went without saying. She now tells the story that she was going to go to college.
Yeah.
And we started, and she was going to focus, and and the deal was, you get into the best college you can, and I'll figure out how to pay for it. Yeah. So anyway, and that it was abundantly clear to them by the time they were early into high school. Anyway, well, high on Simone's list of priorities was to get as far away from Fauquier County, Virginia, as she possibly could. So I spent a fortune on air tickets, and we showed it, and we toured colleges all over the place, all over every bloody time zone.
Yeah.
And at the end, Adrian said, "Listen, would you humor your old mom and look at the universities in D.C., please?"
Yeah.
So okay, fine. So they went to the D.C. colleges, and Simone took one look at George Washington University and fell in love.
Yeah.
That was the place. Natural. After all these plane tickets.
Well, if you'd showed that to her first,
right?
It's an old realtor trick. Show them shitty houses and then show them the house they love.
Right. There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. That's it. So anyway, she came back to Highland, and she said, "Okay, I know where I'm going." And so anyway, and apparently her classmates ended up saying to her, "So I hear you're going north to school." This is what, 44 miles away?
Asphalt 44 miles. As the crow flies, less.
Right. But, and they weren't kidding.
Yeah.
And they weren't wrong.
You're right. I always considered Fauquier where the north meets the south.
Right. Yeah, it really is different. They weren't wrong.
Truly, yeah.
Anyway, so, well, of course, she would hear none of this, naturally. And anyway, so she went off to GW. And she came back at Thanksgiving. And the first thing she did was go to, what's the name of the gift shop in the Plains?
Peyton's?
Peyton's.
Okay.
And she got herself a pillow that says, "That's not the way we do it in the South."
It's a perfect dorm room
and
pillow.
She brought it back, and that was what she put on her pillow.
If only there could be a little carrot in there that said 40 miles south of here.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So being in college, effectively spending time on college campuses, I'm starting to become of the opinion that by the time my 4 and 5 year old are college age, the model of college education is going to be totally different. I fully anticipate my kids not going to college. maybe it's not
as
gonna
we
happen
currently understand
as
it.
we currently understand it. Yeah. Do you have an opinion on the way it looks now, the way it looked 20 years ago, and the way it's going to look 20 years from now?
I'm trying to remember who once said the best way to anticipate the future is to invent it yourself.
Okay.
And so I work for Arizona State University, which I mentioned, is been ranked by U.S. News again and again as the #1 innovation university in America. Yeah, that's right, it is. But anyway, but we're at pretty much at the. I mean, when I now visit legacy universities like Harvard or Stanford, I mean, I feel like I'm in a diorama.
Yeah.
You forget that not everybody else is like this at ASU. I mean, they're still doing the same old stuff in the same old ways. I mean, you forget that there are places like this.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I don't think we know what the future is, but the only way to rationally address what has to be this change is to get your hands dirty.
Yeah.
You have to get up to your elbows and do it, and see what works and what doesn't, and that's what so many colleges, so many legacy colleges and universities are just ignoring this and hoping it'll all go back to normal, quote unquote, someday. Yeah. They're not doing this. So anyway, another story. So back in 1999, Steven Spielberg had a problem. The movie director, the famous Steven Spielberg.
Sure. Yeah.
And his problem was that he'd bought the rights to this short story, 26-page short story called The Minority Report by this dystopian crazy guy named Philip K. Dick. So he had the rights. And he'd signed on Tom Cruise as a star.
Yeah.
And that's it. He didn't have anything else. Well, and he had this problem. He had no idea what the world would look like 50 years out in this movie. No idea, no clue. So he called up a friend of his by the name of Peter Schwartz, who was the chairman of an outfit called Global Business Network, which is the great-granddaddy of scenario planning in North America. And he said, I need a world. So Peter ended up bringing together, and I was a part of GBN at the time, and they had about 100 of us who were quote-unquote remarkable people, RPs. And what we were is heretics. We were designated heretics.
You couldn't have basked in that more happily, I'm sure.
I died and gone to heaven.
Yeah.
My God, I was finally being... And so anyway, so he brought together 15 of us heretics in Shutters on the Beach in Santa Monica. Fabulous hotel. Yeah. It's right out there on the water with, the irritating palm trees, noisy.
Yeah, yeah.
And the surf. Just, would you please tune down the surf?
Turn it down a little, guys.
Yeah, it was great. Anyway, so we went there for 2 days, and we invented the world for the Minority Report.
I've seen that movie 20 times.
Yeah, we invented, and of course, Minority Report ended up. People still talk about how uncannily accurate it was about projecting the future. Gesture computers and blah blah blah. Yeah. Anyway, well, it wasn't prediction. It was these guys who were sitting around that table at Shutters. They were all people who were inventing the future at that time.
Yeah.
So they knew what was in the pipeline because they were creating it.
Yeah.
And so all they did was talk about what was a sure thing in X number of years, or it seemed to them to be a sure thing because they were building it at the time. Yeah. That's why it's uncannily accurate. And
they cheated.
They weren't making predictions. They were reporting on what was in the pipeline. Yeah. So anyway, fine. And so the movie came out in the 2000s. And 3 years ago, there was some anniversary of the movie. And I said, wouldn't it be cool if we brought the rock and roll band back?
Yeah.
If we got everybody back together. So
Yeah.
I brought them all to Arizona State University in Arizona.
No kidding.
Yeah. And anyway, we decided that, well, because we had to have some other than drink, we had to have some semblance of
Yeah, you had to do
reason.
something official.
So anyway, so we decided that what we were going to do is reinvent the future again.
Cool.
Reinvent the world again.
Yeah.
And our focal topic was, what will knowledge enterprises look like in the year 2050 or something like
No
that?
kidding. Yeah.
Yeah. And we used the word knowledge enterprise advisedly, because we didn't want to assume that universities existed, or as they are now today, or colleges.
Okay.
But what we thought was an embedded assumption that would hold up, was that no matter what was happening 50 years from now, there would still be a mechanism for knowledge transfer.
Yeah.
And it's hard to imagine how that wouldn't happen.
That mechanism is starting to feel more like mechanical.
Well, that was the question. This is where scenarios come in.
Yeah.
So naturally, the first thing you occur to is it's all going to be electronic, blah, blah, blah.
Matrix stuff, yes.
Matrix and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's one scenario, but there are many. So there's lots of other possibilities. So anyway, this time we did it again, and we decided to work the future on the future anyway, and on what does knowledge enterprise look like, and but this time we did it. Last time it was highly secret down in the basement of the shutters, for just us and Mr. Spielberg and about 40 of his best friends with all this equipment and gear and stuff. Anyway,
Yeah, the federal government and Steven Spielberg,
Yeah.
the highest level of secrecy.
Yeah. And but anyway, this time we did it in public, and we did it, and there were hundreds of people, and lots of ASU faculty involved and all that stuff. We did anyway, and at the
And you're
end,
like whiteboarding in front of everybody.
yeah, except whiteboard, yeah, except this was far beyond whiteboard. It was, we had more whiz bang than that.
Yeah.
I mean, after all, we have a reputation overall.
Right, sure. You're on your hoverboards and holograms.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
We had to be a little bit more whiz bang than that. And one of the guys who's there was, like, for example, Jaron Lanier, who invented virtual reality.
Okay.
So it's like we had no choice, I mean, it would, on the whiz bang front, we couldn't embarrass Jaron.
Yeah. You're not handing out blue and red cardboard glasses at the front.
Right.
It's for real.
Yeah, it's the real deal.
Yeah.
And that's who these guys were. And so a lot of this came naturally. But the core thing was that the word knowledge enterprise came from Michael Crow, our visionary president at ASU, and I use visionary advisedly. I don't throw that word around casually. Anyway, but ASU has one of its big operations is called the Office of Knowledge Enterprise Development. And knowledge enterprise is, Michael chose that phrase carefully because he was designed. He calls himself a knowledge architect. And he thinks of himself as an architect, and he's saying, so you have to think about how knowledge is going to be architected 50 years out, and you can't assume that the current universities or colleges or whatever are going to exist. They may. That's a perfectly valid scenario, perfectly reasonable, not to be dismissed. Could be there's going to be a lot of people who like the idea of sitting around, on the quad, and so forth. I'm not dismissing it at all.
Of course.
But anyway, so knowledge enterprise, and we were doing this in the public, and we were engaging these people in the program. We broke them up into tables and did scenarios and all that kind of stuff. And and a lot of the critical uncertainties would be, well, what does society look like then? What does family look like then? What does implants look like then?
Yeah.
All kinds of things. And so we had all, and we factored all that in, and we came up anyway, and we came back up at the end of this back in the group session, and that's the moment at which I realized that of all these guys, at least half a dozen of them had created companies, had created operations that had a track record of successful, existence proof that they had successfully designed the future.
Wow.
We had existence proof. That was an inflection point in history. For millennia, humans have viewed the future as something that happens to them.
Sure.
They're along for the ride.
Mm-hmm.
Well, these guys, if they have existence proof that you can design the future and create it, the existence proof, then that's a big deal. That means you can steer.
Yeah.
Thus was born the Guide Project, which I'm the founding director of, which is the Guide Project, How to Design the Future. You can look it up. You can look it up on the internet. Go to our website.
Yeah. What is the website?
howtodesignthefuture.asu.edu.
Cool.
But just type in all one word, how to design the future, and it'll pop up.
Yeah.
And so we're now in the business of trying to scale the Guide Project up to allow zillions of people worldwide. What we've done is we've reverse engineered the patterns. We've got over 70 patterns right now that the guys who have actually succeeded, what are the patterns that you find in common across the guys who have actually succeeded? Not the way you wish this would work, not the way you think this would work. What has worked? And we got over 70 of those patterns, and we'll have perhaps 200 when this is all over.
What's an example of a pattern?
You break it, you buy it.
Okay. Like ownership.
Ownership.
You're making your mistake, and that's my mistake. I fix it. Or I remedy it to the person.
So in this case, for example, the most flagrant disaster in the history of trying to design the future is go fast and break things.
Okay.
Right? Zuckerberg, Facebook.
Without liability and personal recourse.
Or for you or for the society or anything else.
Yeah.
That was probably the stupidest thing in the history of design, of this nascent thing about designing the future.
Yeah.
He'll pay for this forever, and there's no guarantee the company will survive.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, so that's a big pattern. That's a big learning. All these other guys say,
Did that get out of hand? Or did that get out of hand? Like,
he didn't have any adult. I mean, you can speculate about this.
Yeah,
forever.
sure.
He didn't have any adult supervision.
Right.
That's nothing about Google.
He was a kid when he started it.
Yeah, they were all kids, but Google, the board of directors put in adult supervision.
Yeah.
They had a guy there who was, so they couldn't just do anything they wanted. So, this will be debated for generations.
Yeah.
Because we are at this inflection point in history. But anyway, the point is, so we're coming back around to education, and so what will it look like? And I guess the major thing we came away with is that whether this involves tribes, small tribes in the desert, or global internet operations, or brain implants, or whatever, there's going to be one thing you can pretty much count on is there are always going to be 3 levels of stuff. One is going to be data, and the next up from that is going to be knowledge, and the next up from that is going to be wisdom. And the point of education is to provide wisdom.
It's fascinating. I will jump into the short answers. So, as a prolific writer, if you were to write a book about your experience as a parent, what might be the name of a couple chapters?
Making this up as you go along.
Yep. That's the title.
Yeah. And you end up learning as much as you impart.
Yeah.
I mean, as I say, so I'm surrounded by women, right? Mm-hmm. And that has been, I can't tell you how endlessly educational that has been. I can't begin to tell you.
I'm sure they never wanted to teach you anything, but they.
I had no choice. I had no choice.
That's fabulous. So, you go down in history. What kind of dad would you like to be remembered as?
With no convicted felons. Oh well, I guess I can sort of think about that and answer that question. So there was a time in my 20s, I had a pal, my boss, Larry Stern, and he was a he was kind of a legend in his own time. And one afternoon he was playing tennis. He said, "Ouch, I've been stung by a bee," and dropped dead.
Whoa.
Yeah. Well, this was a huge flap in Washington, and there was this investigation to find out if it was Russian agents, which was a credible scenario.
Really?
Yeah, a bunch of things like that. Anyway, be that as it may. So I was in Alaska at the time working on the book, working on Nine Nations, and flew back for the memorial, and picked up my pal Bill Curry in Denver, and we talked about this on our way back, and got there, and it was at the Friends Meeting House on Florida Avenue in D.C., and I'll never forget this. It was not air conditioned, and in the front row, there were 3 women in widow's weeds trying to outwidow each other. One was his wife, the other was his ex-wife, and the third was his girlfriend.
No.
Yeah. Well, I just thought that was the most wonderful thing I'd ever seen in my life.
Absolutely.
I just thought that was wonderful. And so anyway, so I said to myself, I want to spend the rest of my life being surrounded by women. Well, be careful what you ask for. I did end up with that. And so anyway, just not the way I had envisioned originally planned it. Anyway, and so the lesson from that is to be careful what you ask for.
Well, do you watch much television or movies? Do you have a favorite television or movie dad?
I read more than I watch. I miss the golden age of television largely. I feel like, I have something to do in my dotage. I can catch up on all these great shows.
Yeah.
I wonder what Huckleberry Finn would have made as a dad.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I do wonder about that. Here was one of the great characters in American literature and one of the great outlaws and one of the great guys. And anyway, and I had a hunch he'd make a pretty good dad.
Yeah.
I think his kids would be okay.
Cool. Very cool. If you had the opportunity, money, time, space, no object, to give a gift to every father on the planet, what gift might that be?
Wow. Time. I'm not sure that time... Well, I don't know this. I'm making this up. You sprung this on me. I haven't really thought it through.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that time with the kids per se is the magic thing. Mm-hmm. And at the same time that I don't believe that there's such a thing as quote-unquote quality time.
Yeah.
But I think there's somewhere in between. One of the things I've learned is that they do listen. You just can never tell when.
Might be something you said 10 years ago and they decided to listen.
Yeah, and it's
now.
not necessarily what you wanted them to listen to, and
they're watching.
Yeah, they're watching, and they are. They're watching, and they're listening, and they're processing, and that's the part you can't control. Anyway, so so again, you do the best you can with what you got at the time, and if you're lucky, I guess if I could bequeath it is the opportunity to realize when you screwed up, and make it and hope to be able to adjust.
What an incredible answer. That's an incredible answer, Joel. I like that a lot. Imagine you are on I-95 going 75 miles an hour, 90 miles an hour, however fast you go, and you have a billboard, and on that billboard has to be legible to people driving at that speed, a piece of advice. Could be parenting advice, but a piece of advice to dads, maybe something you know or something someone shared with you. What would you put on that billboard?
I got a huge wall hanging in my office in here that's now faded with time, and I might put that up there, and it says, "Not all who wander are lost." J.R.R. Tolkien.
There's layers to that. I wandered, and I think my parents.
And I think the girls did too.
Yeah.
And I'd like. Sometimes it's occurred to me. I wonder how long. I wonder if they've spent time. Especially Evangeline. I know she's paid attention to that one. Mm-hmm. And I also had a little button from the '60s that I had up there that I know she's paid attention to. It says, "Subvert the dominant paradigm."
That takes a minute.
That takes a minute, yeah. Especially if you're little.
Yeah.
You have to look up all.
You have to figure out what paradigm you're a part of.
But she's paid attention to all those things, and the subvert the business about not all who wander are lost is that being weird is not an unmixed blessing. Believe me, I can speak from great experience. But but it's not necessarily. But if you're weird and your father is weird, and you look at your dad and you realize, well, he made it okay, so maybe I'll make it. Maybe there's a hope for me too. Mm-hmm. I didn't have that privilege. My father was as straight and narrow and normal, and he was just as normal as they come. Anyway, but Evie had the opportunity to have a father who was at least as weird as she was, and so therefore, I guess I'd like to think she could possibly take some hope.
I think that's so cool. It speaks to me. It speaks to giving your kids permission to be authentically themselves, which allows them to blossom in their most, in the place that makes the most sense to them.
To a point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Except for this and this and this and this.
I got two more questions for you. First one was one that was lent to me that I really enjoy. When in your life do you feel the most love?
Have I ever felt the most?
Just generally. Or however you care to interpret the question and answer it.
I should take the fifth.
Don't upset anybody.
Yeah. That's an interesting question. I'll have to get back to you on that. I don't have a glib answer to that.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, and finally, in the event that this recording lasts beyond any apocalyptic scenarios you might conjure, a message that might benefit Simone, Lewis's children, a message that Joel Garreau could deliver to the generations that follow that you feel might be worth sharing.
Well, there was that story I told you about how we were in the business of creating happy humans.
Yeah. And
happy, there are levels to happiness if you start drilling down into this.
Okay.
And one is the the kind of loosey-goosey happy, Doris Day giggles, shits and giggles kind of happiness. Then there was the second level, which is what Thomas Jefferson meant by pursuit of happiness. Mm-hmm. And he was channeling Aristotle and Udemy and all that stuff. And that meant essentially it meant a life with a life with with scope, and a life with meaning, and finding your place in a place like that. And it gets more complicated after that. But anyway, that whole second thing is happiness in the sense of a meaningful life in world affording it scope. That level of happiness, if you aim for that, how wrong can you go?
Love it. Thank you. It's awesome. Thank you, Joel.
All right, man.
Love talking to you, man.
All right. Pleasure.